here with Tracy. And this is our weekly client coaching call for Wednesday, March 15th. And very excited to be here. Hope that there are plenty of you out there on social that are benefiting from this. And let's see. We are going to talk about short form podcasts today. Short form podcasts. The good, the bad. Mostly bad, I think. But is it good? Is it bad? We're going to have some fun
You're
with it.
going to call it out before we even start?
I'm teasing. Come on. I'm building anticipation.
Really? Yes, you're just
idea.
giving them the net result.
No. I think even if I said, I think it's bad, maybe Tracy thinks it's good. Who knows what you're going to say, what I'm going to say. But
who knows what I will say? It's
actually, I was just sort of off topic a little bit. I was, well, it's related, meaning, I was talking with, it was either a customer or a prospect just yesterday. Oh yeah, it was a customer about their titles for their episodes. And this is not what we're going to talk about today, but he was saying, should I not put the main, not reveal, like, cause his podcast is about mistakes. And he's like, should I not have mentioned the mistake in the title and just have the guest name? And I'm like, no, I think if you just have the guest name, you're relying on people searching on the guest name. That's not going to be helpful. But if you actually do tease to the mistake that you have going on there, then I think even if you understand, oh, that's the mistake you're going to talk about, if you're familiar with this show, a listener wants to know about the journey. They don't just want to know about the destination. What kind of mistake? And in this case, it was somebody said, regretted a mistake buying a $10,000 mastermind. And I'm like, I immediately thought, ooh, I wonder what $10,000 mastermind that was. So I want to listen, right? So anyway, something you said made me think of that. So I just thought I would share before we get recording today's topic.
Okay, well, let's get recording.
Well, I think
so for all of you who are watching us out on live stream for the first time, and I hope we have some new people who met me this week, because we did a wonderful webinar for this great group of women that are operating in kind of a mastermind model for how to bring their digital businesses forward and working through websites. And it was just been a fabulous group. So I am hope that we have some new people here. So here's what we do.
Oh.
We are showing you exactly how we run our coaching and how we get our content created at the same time, because that seems like it would be so great if we revealed to you what we were doing. So we are recording our Feed Your Brand podcast episode at the beginning of our coaching call. Then we open it up to Q&A and ask away. And sometimes we will take little segments of what is done afterwards and add it to our resource library. So sometimes the questions that you ask, we might say, hey, we're going to make a resource library item out of this because this is such a common question that it's going to go to everyone. Sometimes we also address very specific questions that are related to you, your podcast, and your business. And so that does not become a generalized, but we are here live streaming this so that everyone can learn from what we're doing and how we do it. And so we definitely want to reveal that to you here. So let's start our episode just like we would do, so that it is the verbal cue to our editing team that we are starting the episode portion here. And it's, of course, I choke on that. And thank goodness we weren't, editing that. That will be edited out anyway. It's not a part of it.
So Tracy, since you have the title and I haven't seen exactly what you wrote, why don't you lead off this one? So I don't misstate it, unless you want to.
No, I gave it to you. It's in there. Oh, sorry.
No,
I didn't paste it to you. It's what it is in the calendar. So, but hold on. Here we're going to do.
Well, the calendar had a placeholder from what I saw.
That's it.
Microtrends and short form podcast. Oh, perfect. All right. So do you want me to lead off or no?
No, just go.
All right. Hey there. Welcome back to Feed Your Brand. I'm Tom Hazard, along with my co-host Tracy. Today, we're going to talk about a subject we get a lot of questions about from prospects and actually new podcasters and, longtime existing podcasters alike. And that is about short form podcasting. So we want to talk about microtrends and short form podcasting. Does it work?
Well, and this is coming up because TikTok is sort of exploring this beta of podcasting, but TikTokers and podcasting, not always a great match. And we've had some TikTok influencers who came over to podcasting, and it wasn't always the smoothest, easiest transition. So what we discovered was that for a lot of them, this model that they have of how they work doesn't always translate into podcasting and podcast listeners and subscribers. And that's really kind of what we want to do. It's not that there isn't a place for some of these shorter form things. It's the question, does this belong in podcasting? Does this belong as a podcast? So can you take what you do on TikTok and repurpose it? Can you take what you do on YouTube Shorts and repurpose it as is into podcasting? I think it goes better the other way, Tom. And that's kind of my premise for today, is that I think there's a place for us to take micro content out of our longer form podcast content and turn it into great TikToks, great YouTube shorts. We do it all the time on our end, and we do it for clients, and we do it for our episodes for Feed Your Brand. We have lots of TikToks that came out of our episodes.
And that I agree with you. And I think this is a great topic to talk about. I think most podcasters would get a lot more value out of having micro content, having short form segments that are in their longer form podcast episode, but then you can repurpose it in other places, right?
Yeah, and that's what it is. But just taking everything that you do in short form content on TikTok and saying, I'm going to repurpose this and this is my podcast, we're not seeing that work for anyone. And we're not seeing it translate because their TikTok followers aren't always podcast listeners like that. So you clearly have to get them off of TikTok and get them to subscribe to your podcast. And that doesn't transfer when you're already providing it in TikTok. So why would they come over when it's exactly the same in podcast? So we see this happening from a social media influencer. It's not the first time. It's not like it's a TikTok problem or a YouTube Shorts problem. We've seen this before when there were people who were doing Instagram stories and they were like, how do I get my Instagram followers to come over to podcasting? Well, the best way to get them to come to your podcast is to give them something more. And more implies longer, right? It doesn't mean exactly the same thing that's over there already. And that's where we're not seeing that. But I think one of the questions is also, are we seeing content get shorter and shorter and be acceptable in podcasting? And I would say not everywhere. There are places for it where you want to maybe do a day a week. It's not your normal podcast, but maybe you want to include something shorter form. So where Tom was talking about sort of this content creation model of thinking about, do I want to have segments for it? For some podcast genres, some segments, some market areas, it actually is great to have those shorter forms separated. So we have a lot of wellness podcasts, for instance, that might do meditation Mondays. And that's a really common term. Like I can think of at least 5 or 6 podcasts that all have meditation Mondays. Now, some of them only do it live stream and they don't re-air it in their podcast. That's okay. Some of them do it in their podcast and then air it and live stream it separately. So like it goes the other direction. Some do their meditation Mondays with their community only and then share it out as a TikTok. So there are varying ways you can do that, but there are some of those occurring. And I would say that's happening more often than not, where people are adding micro content to their weekly podcast, but it is not taking away from their actual full length podcast that they're doing. So it's in addition to. And then there are those that are doing segments, as Tom was referring to, within their podcast. Now, we do have a couple of podcasters that really specifically are utilizing those, and they're specifically creating them for TikTok. So you might do tip of the day. You might do I do mine is fluid through my podcast, but in the binge factor, I do this podcaster specific, the podcaster that I'm interviewing, their binge factor. We turn that into a TikTok. We turn that into a YouTube short because we want it to be something that where we tag that podcaster and then they share it out. So basically, it's like a testimonial of me saying, this is what's so great about this podcast. It's why you're going to want to binge on it. So of course, they're going to reshare that. And so by putting it in a YouTube short, putting it in a TikTok, doing it in an Instagram story or in an Instagram TV model in a short version, and doing that makes it really shareable for them on social media in that short form that is acceptable. But when we say micro content, I do want to define that. It is under a minute. That's micro content today, under a minute. We're not talking about 10-minute podcasts. Okay. We do see a diminishing return under 10 minutes in podcasting. And what I mean by that is that they have lower subscriber bases, lower ongoing listener numbers. So like overall downloads, plays when you have short form content. It doesn't mean that if you have a short form 10-minute and yet you also have a long form 35-minute, that they both don't get played during the week. That happens. But we see shows that are only under 10 minutes. For the most part, with very few exceptions, they don't end up with the subscriber numbers and the play numbers that everyone else does in the podcasting ecosystem. There's a few exceptions to that. The Buffer podcast is under 10 minutes and it's an awesome podcast. But it's focused on social media marketers. So it being under 10 minutes makes sense, right?
There are definitely podcasts that a short form content makes sense, but it's very, I think, limited applications. If there are many shows that are a quick news related podcasts that are under 10 minutes, and it's literally giving you some daily news, some headlines, and it ages out of relevance within 24 hours, right? I mean, that's just very different.
Right, which is why they then have lower downloads, lower plays, because if I come to it and I find this podcast, I'm going to skip all of those because they're outdated. So I might catch the new one, but I'm not going to catch the old ones. So where I might go back though and listen to all your interview episodes or all the other long form episodes because their content has more relevance than something set in time. So thinking about those is like, how am I growing my listener base and subscriber base? How am I getting play through? Which is really critically important. And if you think that just because it's shorter, you're going to have 100% playthrough, that's going to help you in the algorithm system that is podcasting. It doesn't work like that. Podcasting system is set so that playthrough rate is one factor, but it is the number of minutes total.
Yeah,
also
duration and cumulative number of total minutes or average minutes played per listener over units of time is another big factor. And so your short form
charting
podcast
factor
is only going to get you so far.
Yeah. So charting factors, that's what I want you to understand. How you're going to rank on a chart, how you're going to get new and noteworthy if you're a startup podcast and you're just launching, but how you're going to stay on the chart. The ones that with longer durations, I mean, there's a reason Joe Rogan's podcast is 90 minutes to 2 hours, right? And it gets playthrough at that rate because it's right for his audience. But those numbers, those charts are based on duration because the podcasting players, the ecosystem that is the directory, wants people to stay in it and play podcasts more and more and more, right? So unless you have a bingeable show that is going to get me to listen to every 10-minute one, and I'm going to go through your entire show catalog and I'm going to listen to hundreds of episodes, that's not of interest to the player. They don't reward that. The directories don't reward that. And so their algorithms are not driven to support micro content because it's just too short. If you're going to go in and out and listen to a 1 minute, that's not of benefit to them. They're not social media. They don't want to move you on to the next thing. So this idea of, there was this articles that have been coming out about how micro content is on the rise, and this is the TikTok influence, right? The reality is that the TikTok influence is solely in TikTok. it is adjusting what's happening on Instagram. It's adjusting what's happening on Facebook. It's adjusting the fact that YouTube Shorts have come about, but YouTube Shorts were coming about because of Instagram stories, because of Instagram TV, because those were already short form. So it really wasn't in response to TikTok. And I would say YouTube Shorts are honestly longer than 30 seconds for the most part. I do see them. They're usually a couple of minutes long.
I
They
see
tend
that
to be
too.
just slightly longer. They are still, I believe, under 5 minutes for the most part. What sort of trends over there are happening. So they're not a 10-minute piece of content. But I do see this sort of downgrade of the value in podcasting of short form. While we don't see podcasts that are over an hour typically doing well, with very few exceptions, obviously, as I mentioned before, Joe Rogan. But in general, podcasts that are over an hour don't have quite the high level of download numbers. So there's kind of a sweet spot under 50 minutes. And we see that hasn't changed year over year in the numbers that we see. So if we look at overall active podcasts and the ones that have good numbers and where they're trending, the interview style shows over 35 minutes do better. Under 30 minutes do slightly worse than other shows. So like comparatively, interview shows under 30 minutes, and there are lots of them, the under 30 minutes tend to not go in depth enough, and podcast listeners are wise to that. And so they tend to pick shows, interview style shows, that are over 35 minutes. So usually they're between 35 and 55 minutes. Under an hour is also very typical. Like, I think it's probably a binge listener and a listener model that is like, I have an hour. So if they see something that tips over 60 minutes, and 60 minutes or more, like in that sort of mindset, it's kind of like, yeah, I want to be at like 99 cents and not $1, right? It's just this mindset of like, I have an hour, which means that I don't want to go exactly up to that hour because I've got something else I've got to jump off and do. So it needs to be under it. And so that's why I think that sort of 55 minute thing has happened, is that there is this sort of understanding when my episode is just under an hour, it has higher downloads than my episodes that have over an hour of content. So
It's funny how that psychology works, because
it
a
is.
lot of podfasters really play at 1.5 times speed, right? You can get an hour done in,
30 minutes.
40 minutes, right? Or 1.5. What was
Well,
that?
1.5 is 45 minutes.
45
so somewhere
minutes
5 minutes, 40.
and 2 times speed, 30 minutes. And a lot of podcasts are just fine to listen to that way. I have no problem, certainly with 1.5 times speed. But it's still, if people aren't accustomed to that and aren't thinking about it, they are going to look at that time length and how much time do I have to commit as a listener, right? And it has an impact. The other thing I want to talk about, this micro content, Tracy, not to get too far off on the long form, hour long episode or less or more, but when you talk about TikTok, and we definitely are seeing more podcast shows having success going the other way, from a long form podcast taking, clips of content and using it on social, than going the other way, like you said. But I also want to say that we're seeing differences in what social platform are working for different podcasters. And sometimes, your audience just may not be on TikTok, right? But we're seeing people who are, experimenting, and I don't mean this to sound bad in this sense, but failing on TikTok, really not setting the world on fire, not getting a lot of interest there, are
It's a
killing it
conversion
on,
failure.
well, but
Right,
even
let's be
views
clear.
and likes and shares, even within the platform. I'm not saying it isn't effective in moving people off the platform. It might be, but in terms of engagement on the social platform, some people are having a lot more success on Instagram, but it depends on your content
And your audience.
and your audience, no question.
Right. So is my audience on TikTok? Is my audience on Instagram? Is my audience in YouTube? Where is my audience seeking information? And I think it also has to do with a stage of journey. I think that we clearly see a bump up in listenership to feed your brand more than we do the binge factor from our YouTube shorts. And the reason I see that is because someone is looking at how to podcast. So I'm curious as to how to podcast. I'm looking for tips on podcasting, how to podcast, what microphone should I use? It's still our most popular episode. The best and worst microphones is our most popular episode. And we do see a significant, if I look at the traction on that episode of where the traffic's coming from, YouTube is and Google and those places are where that why that traffic is higher on that episode than other episodes. So we're clearly seeing a conversion on it, which makes sense. If you want to learn how to do something, you go to YouTube. Right? Our kids, my daughter was making bracelets and she wanted to know how to tie them tightly. And she said she watched 7 or 8 YouTube videos because everyone she tried still didn't work. Right? So how many times do we do that where we go down a YouTube rabbit hole learning how to do something? Right? So that's clearly a distinctive advantage for our YouTube shorts, for the how-to tips that come from Feed Your Brand, come from the show, and go to YouTube, clearly lead to not just someone understanding who we are as a company, our company Podetize, and then coming through and consuming things on Podetize, but it comes through with Feed Your Brand listeners who then consume more and go deeper. So we're clearly seeing a YouTube short link to the episode traction to subscriber, right? Like it's a path that happens there. We don't see that happen in the same way on the binge factor. But what I do see is I see that in LinkedIn. So we post about a podcaster that's successful on LinkedIn, and we see clearly binge factor listeners coming from there and then going, wow, that was a great interview. I really liked the whole length of it. So I saw the little short that happened on LinkedIn, and now I listened to the whole episode, and now I've decided to listen to even more binge factor episodes and I become a subscriber. So we see it coming that direction. And those people come through and also become clients, but after consuming many, many binge factor episodes and understanding that, and then maybe also subscribing to the Feed Your Brand as well. So like it's kind of a two-sided thing, but those are typically podcast hosts who are already podcasters, right? They're not startups. So we have two very clear and distinct different paths for clients and conversion that come from two different social medias, but come from the micro content to finding our podcast, consuming it in long form, and then becoming binge listeners, and then becoming clients, right? It's like a path through those. That might be the path for your business. That means that the micro content is valuable to you in attracting listeners to your show, and then people who might consume your coaching, your business, your SaaS, whatever it might be that you're selling or that you're trying to convert to. E-commerce products, whatever it might be in the end of the day. Now we have difference on TikTok. On TikTok, we're adopting a slightly different strategy. Our tips are actually getting a lot of interest and traction, but also we are testing out some new things over there because it hasn't been converting at the same way that YouTube Shorts is or LinkedIn is from those two directions. It's just not converting at the same pace.
You know, I think back to our first podcast, Tracy, where we had a long form interview every week. And then we did for a few years, we did a short form podcast 4 days a week. It wasn't micro content though. I don't know that I would call it micro content. It was usually 10 minutes, or so, 10 to 15. And it was answering a question from a listener sometimes, or then after a while we did different themes for different days of the week. It was short form topics that were feeding a lot of questions people had. It was feeling a frequently asked questions on our website. It was doing all sorts of things. And that kind of short form content, I think, can be useful and keep having more touch points with your podcast listeners if your genre, your topic has, the opportunity to have that kind of shorter, episodes. But by themselves, we see they're limited, that you got to still show up for that, longer episode have more meat on the bone, more content, more value you're providing, have a guest, a discussion with a guest, or an interview with a guest, sharing a case study, sharing their story. I mean, podcast listeners like to dig deep into stories, in order to, to learn and to be entertained both. But I do think, if you think you have the opportunity for some shorter episodes more frequently, and they can be simpler. I mean, you don't have to do much editing. If you can deliver it quickly, you really may not have to do any editing. And you can have more touch points and have a different classification of an episode. And then, if listeners like that, they'll keep listening to them. If they don't, they'll just skip over them and have the long form. But there's lots of opportunities for shorter content. I think you just need to do a little testing, number one, and see what works. You'll see it in the downloads. You'll see it, in listenership if people are, and play through if you're looking at your stats on something like Apple. But then, it's a little different than the social media short form content is really what
it's really what we're
there.
saying. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that you really have to look at your goals for things, and there are different purposes. You might, like we said, have a segment or have a separate podcast. So we do actually have some who use our poditized production system where they do their full length episode every single week. They do that through the full production system. They do a quick little live stream somewhere that's under 10 minutes, where like the Meditation Mondays or something that they do like that. And then they DIY and use our do-it-yourself publishing system in Poditizes hosting, and just flip back and forth between being able to use the two, because it's just this quick little short form. It's exactly as is. It's short. It doesn't need editing. It doesn't need anything. And it's just them doing it. We do have others who want to do a follow-up. So lessons learned from what happened in my interview show, and they want to just do a quick little thing and they live stream it. So then they publish that as an episode as well. So it's live stream first, the social media model first for the short form content, and then republishing in the podcast. But it's not taking away from the long form, which is really driving the listenership, the downloads, the plays, and the subscribers that is happening in the podcast side. It's supplementing it. And it is also a way for you to go back and forth. And this is something really important, giving social media followers a way to get more is to send them to the long form podcast and not have it be an exact duplicate.
Right.
And a way for them to get your listeners to go to the social media platform is to say it's going to be live first. And so you'll get my follow-up or my comments or my lessons learned or my Meditation Mondays. You're going to get that live first, and it will be a podcast 2 weeks later or a week later or whatever. Now you're giving them a reason to show up on social media. Great for a little news segment that might be a supplement to your week, because a news segment, you want it to be timely and relevant. You want them to come to the live stream. So now you've driven them back and forth between your podcast and your social. Now you're driving engagement and connection and relationship building, which is our ultimate goal. So using micro content in that way is beneficial, but using it as a replacement for podcasting, not recommended. I just don't see the numbers there, Tom, and I just don't. I mean, I think that it's working in very, very rare cases.
I think it is working in very rare cases. I agree. What we see most often, people get tons of views of a micro content on social, and all those people who are viewing it are not podcast listeners. I mean, not all. I mean, I overstated that. A lot of them are not. And so, I mean, we have one person who literally has a post on Instagram that was created micro content from their podcast, and it literally gotten over 1 million views on Instagram. Now, we have seen a spike in listenership of the podcast, but only in the thousands, not in the tens and thousands or hundreds of thousands. So it is a different audience, and it can raise awareness and drive people to the podcast, or more importantly, hopefully drives people to your website. Of course, we always recommend all roads from social media should lead back to your website. That's where you're going to benefit the most. But you just have to understand, I guess, have realistic expectations. People are scrolling through a social media feed and stop at looking something that's interesting. That doesn't mean they click and go to the website, or they click and go find out about the podcast if they're not already inclined to do that, or the right type of person who would be interested to do that.
And I think, again, I want to drive this back to your content topic and your show basis or your business basis or your mission basis, right? Some of you have nonprofits and you have missions or communities that you're building. It's like, what is your goal for what you're doing on this? And if it is to drive to sales, clients, courses sold, books sold, all of those types of things do better when we have long form content. Purchases happen from long form content better than they do from short form, unless the short form is the answer to my problem. I typed into YouTube, how do I do this? And the answer was podatize. This was the tip, and I never heard this from anyone else, and I need to be a part of the podatize community, so I'm going to host with podatize, right? Like, that's the path of thinking that happens. So they were looking for an answer, and your short form content was that, and the podcast was even more support for the fact that you have all the answers for me, or you're the right type of person for me. And that's really, those two paths are clearly what we see working again and again across our over 1,000 clients and over 1,000 shows that we're monitoring and managing for people. So when we see that path working, that's why we're bringing this out to you. It doesn't mean that there isn't someone out there who's the exception to the rule, but I guarantee you it's because they had tons of followers who were looking for more, and now they're coming to this, or they were looking for an easier consumption model. Because if I wanted to get everything, every piece of content, every tip you had, it's faster to use a YouTube Shorts channel, because the channel's all organized. It's like a playlist, or use the podcast to do it, than it is for me to like scroll through and try to get it all from your Instagram or all from your TikTok. It's just harder to consume content there, because TikTok and Instagram, they're all driven to interrupt you with other people's stuff. Right. So it's just, I have to like dive through into your profile, into your community, like really work hard to stay within your content. And that's why if you have this as a playlist, you have these things out there, it does make it as an easier organization. And so that's the only way. And that's why I believe that the conversion rate is so low on turning into subscribers and into those things, because it's somebody who says, I didn't just want this one tip, I want all your tips. So I'm going to come find you and I'm going to consume it. And I still don't want to watch a long video, because that's not who I am. I only want, like, I'm that
Sure.
kind of person who
Look,
wants everything in 30-second bites, and that's it, personality wise. But someone who deeply wants to learn something, they want to consume the long content.
absolutely true. And the other reality that we all have to remember is that social media platforms are designed and engineered to keep people engaged on their platform. They don't want to send people away. They want you to go down a rabbit hole on their platform. So it's not easy to get people off of that social app and over to your website. It's the goal, and it's a great way that a lot of people can be aware of your show, the value you're offering. The right people hopefully will be curious enough and then go to a link within a post and come to your website or go check out your podcast. But all those other people that don't, they probably were never going to listen to your show or anybody's show anyway, right?
That's right. So anyway, we hope this helps you kind of balance this idea of like, should I shorten my podcast and make it all micro content? Should I take my micro content and turn it into a show? And we're going to really say is like, halt. Podcasting is a little bit different. Let's really think about what your purpose is, what you're doing. And is there a way to blend it to make sure that you're doing both? And maybe that's doing like within the show, doing calls out to create micro content for your social media, or do a repurpose like we talked about, where we're doing live streams and we're doing meditation Mondays, or we're doing this short form content in a hybrid way where we have multiple shows per week or multiple episodes per week, where we're covering micro content and our long form content at the same time. So best advice we can give you on this, if this has been something that you've been contemplating.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Hope y'all got value out of this today. We'll be back with another great topic next time. This has been Tom and Tracy Hazard on Feed Your Brand.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We're out.
Right.
And if you want to type in the chat your questions, if you're out there on social media, I am monitoring our Restream platform and taking a look for that. We have had Dr. Heath, who I was on his show this past week, Therapy Bites. Oh my gosh, really cool podcast. Some great production value, lots of fun. Definitely not a boring podcast on psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. Very fun. And I'm looking forward to hearing the episode result from my being a guest on his show. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Heath, and everybody check out Therapy Bites. Great new podcast that I just found, but it's been out for quite some time. They've got hundreds of episodes.
Oh, awesome.
So let's see. We've got a few questions. Are there any instructions on how to do a DIY episode? Rosie is asking.
So yes, the reality, let me just check. I will check your.
And so for those of you listening on
user
social media,
account. Yep.
what Rosie is asking for, and Rosie is a Hoditize user and a client, is that she's doing a publishing model and using our services, is asking how to self-publish. And we have a hybrid system that allows you to do both.
All right. So I just checked Rosie's account and hers didn't have that box checked to be able to self-publish episodes. So I just did that. So basically, Rosie, your show, as most shows that have launched with Poditize, you have your pre-recorded intro and outro uploaded to the system, and you can record your own episode in any format, video file, audio file, doesn't matter. Upload it, or you basically go to the episodes tab and you're going to click the button that says self-publish episode. And then you got to give it a title and a description. And then the other one is you got to upload that recording. And if, you don't really need to edit it, which is kind of the idea here. You upload it, our system will allow you to trim the beginning and end. So, if it didn't start perfectly when you wanted to, or even you flubbed at the beginning and you restart, you can just play it, listen to it, pause it, and say, hey, start it here. It allows you to trim off the beginning and the end if you need to. And then you check a box that says add intro and add outro. And then you could schedule it to publish. And as it schedules to publish, or just publish it now if you want to, you don't have to schedule it. It'll add the intro and outro on for you. And then you got another episode of your podcast published. Now it's only going to be an audio show. Obviously, if you're self-publishing, if you need any other content from it, you'd have to create that yourself, but you certainly can. And a lot of podcasters do that. They supplement. And it's a great way to do something very timely, because our production service, doing everything we do, we have our lead time, and that's because there's an awful lot we do for every episode. But if you just, let's say you want to get a message out there that's very timely, something new happened in the news, or any kind of announcement you want to put out to your listeners and you don't want to wait, you could just record it, upload it, publish it, and it'll be out there on the apps, a lot of them within an hour if you publish immediately, sometimes sooner. And other apps might not be out there until the next morning, but it certainly would publish very quickly.
Yeah. And so Rosie's putting in it's a great way to do like a 5-minute promo for an event that you don't want to make a separate ad for, but you want to just go into a little bit of like, here's the great opportunity that I have for you. Right now, remember, you can also unpublish or delete that episode after an event happens.
After
so
it's no longer relevant.
Have it in there, and you can also delete it later. So like, that's something. There is a 2-step delete in our system so that accidentally don't delete episodes. That requires you to type the word delete to make sure you really want it gone. So, but that's just a precautionary little bit of like, people are like, wow, why do I have to do this? It's just because we don't want you to make a mistake, because once it's deleted, it's gone out of your feed within 24 hours. Then not recoverable.
Well, it'll be gone from your list immediately after you really delete it. So we just want to make sure you really mean delete it, because you could move something to draft if you weren't sure, and it would still be there, but not published.
So Tina is saying that she's getting great response on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook with Reels, and YouTube's doing really better with the full episode. And that's what we do find as well. YouTube Shorts is a slightly separate section, and you should have that in place, and you can use it too and see if it does something similar that you're seeing on the Reels side. So let's see, any other things in the chat I am not seeing? And I don't see, I'm just double checking on our, nope, not seeing it anywhere else as well. So we're good.
Good.
Okay. So we are really working on beefing up our resource library. So these questions that you all are asking are if they don't exist in our resource library, we are going to add them. And although I'm very sure we have a tutorial, Rosie, in there about doing a DIY self-publishing,
I'm sure
but it's
do.
probably, it needs, we need to update it. And so it's a great time for us to
All
check
of them
that
need
out.
Updates, yeah.
And I just asked our new member, so please welcome Nazanin. She is on the call today with us, and she is supporting this resource library project. And so she will reach out to you when we have a new one in there. She'll make a note to message you, Rosie. I'm sure by that time you will have tried it yourself and played with it. It's not hard.
It's really, I think Rosie's got enough experience.
Yeah, she knows how to use our form.
You can pick it up pretty quick.
Yeah, it's just you're required to fill out more fields than you are when you do a submit an episode for production, because
I don't know if that's actually true. It
I think
how
the
much information
feed requires it. Yeah. It depends on how much, but you don't have to put a description in. So into
for a request.
For a request.
We write that's true. But anyway, to publish an episode doesn't require too much information.
Yeah. So anything else anyone has? And if not, then we'll end early today. Let's take a look at our next topic. I'll be pulling that up while we're just waiting to see if anyone else has any questions. We are going to talk about working guidelines for using podcast AI responsibly. And so this is something that we are exploring. I gave a speech about code of ethics developments and teams for code of ethics developments. I gave a speech on that in LinkedIn webinar about 3 weeks ago. And so this is kind of the follow-up from that, but it's specifically talking about issues related to this. And this is back in the news because voice AI. Voice AI is really coming to the forefront and has been in conversation about deep fakes in voice. And what I do want you to know behind the scenes, and we'll talk about that, is that deep fakes in voice are a lot easier to track and understand that it's happening than it is in video. And there's lots of reasons why that, but we'll talk about that next week as well.
Yeah, there's a very interesting topic.
Yeah. And I think, in some cases you're going to start treading on intellectual property, and like, there's just a whole bunch of things that it starts to tread into, and defamation, as well as, certain types of, are you misrepresenting a brand or a person? Like, you can get into issues there. So we'll talk about some of that.
The whole new thing.
Yeah. So anyway, well, I think that's it. We'll end for today. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you. And as always, if you are looking for any of these coaching calls all in one place, go check Feed Your Brand. That's where we keep them. So this episode that we just recorded won't air for about 2 weeks into the Feed Your Brand. So it's always like 2 weeks behind in terms of that, because it gives us time to re-promote it. And also because this live stream is out there, so people can watch it in the live stream version. We want to give them 2 weeks to watch the replay. So that's kind of why we do it the way we do.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Till next time. And that'll be what, the 22nd?
Yep.
Wednesday,
at noon Pacific time,
March. All right. Till then, have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.